Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Amy, and joining me today is our brilliant expert guide.
Tom. Hi, everyone.
Today, we're embarking on a fascinating exploration into the mind and world of one of history's greatest thinkers, Aristotle. Our goal is to really unpack his incredibly wide-ranging ideas, understand his unique methods, and grasp why his influence continues to shape our understanding of so many things, even now, over 2 millennia later.
Yeah, it's quite a task. We've got a rich collection of sources to draw from, and we're ready to extract the most important nuggets for you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we dive into his philosophy, maybe start with the man himself. Who was Aristotle? Where did his journey begin?
Well, what's fascinating here is how his life experiences, even though they're sparsely documented, they really seem to have influenced his philosophical path. He was born back in 384 BCE in Stagira. That's in what's now northeastern Greece.
Right, so sometimes he's called the Stagirite?
Exactly. And then at 17, a pretty young age, he headed off to Athens. He went to study at Plato's Academy, which was, the preeminent place of learning at the time.
The place to be.
Definitely. And he stayed there for a long time, actually, until Plato's death in 347 BCE, about 20 years.
20 years. So a student of Plato, but then he eventually struck out on his own. What happened next?
Indeed. After Plato died, he didn't stay in Athens immediately. He spent several years traveling places like Asia Minor and Lesbos. And this was a really important time because he expanded his research, particularly into marine biology. He was really engaging with empirical observation, looking at the world directly.
So getting his hands dirty, so to speak, not just theory.
Precisely. Then in 343 BCE, he received a truly unique request. Quite an invitation, really. King Philip of Macedon invited him to Pella to tutor his 13-year-old son,
The Alexander?
the one and only Alexander, who would, of course, become Alexander the Great.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The teacher of Alexander the Great. What do we actually know about their time together? Did Aristotle genuinely shape the future conqueror?
Well, despite the popular image, the concrete details are surprisingly scarce. It's a bit frustrating for historians. It's reasonable to conclude some tuition definitely took place probably for about 2 or 3 years when Alexander was, say, between 13 and 15.
Okay.
But by 15, Alexander was already serving as a deputy military commander, which kind of suggests the really intensive tutoring period wasn't maybe as long as some stories make it out to be.
Right, he had other things on his mind by then.
He certainly did. Though some sources do mention Aristotle gifting Alexander an annotated copy of the Iliad. A nice touch, if true.
A fitting gift. So, after shaping the future of Macedon, or at least tutoring the future king, he returned to Athens, right?
Yes. Eventually, in 335 BCE, he went back to Athens for the second and final time. And this time, he established his own school, the Lyceum.
Ah, a rival to Plato's Academy.
In a way, yes. And those associated with his school were later called the Peripatetics.
The walkers, right, because they walked around while discussing.
That's the likely origin,
Yeah.
probably due to a covered walkway, a peripatos, on the school's property. And the Lyceum became this incredible hub of research across just a vast array of subjects. They essentially assembled what some consider the first great library of antiquity.
Wow.
He also had a son during this time, Nicomachus, and his famous Nicomachean Ethics is named for him.
A personal touch there.
Yeah. But his time in Athens came to an end again. In 323 BCE, after Alexander the Great died, anti-Macedonian sentiment flared up. Aristotle, maybe thinking about what happened to Socrates, decided to leave. He famously remarked he saw no reason for Athens to sin twice against philosophy.
Powerful statement.
It was. He left for Chalcis and died there the following year, in 322 BCE.
Okay, thinking about the scope of his work now, it's just mind-boggling. His extant writings alone span so many fields: logic, ethics, biology, politics. How did he even organize such a massive body of knowledge?
Yeah, that raises a really important question. How do we even approach his voluminous work? It's a lot. He might have written as many as 200 treatises, we think, but only about 31 survive.
Only 31. Still a huge amount.
Absolutely. And the prose can be, well, challenging. It often reads like lecture notes or even drafts, rather than polished works meant for publication.
Right, not exactly beach reading.
Not usually, no. But they absolutely contain core Aristotelian doctrine. And he did try to categorize learning. He broke it down into 3 main sciences or branches.
Okay, what were they?
First, the theoretical sciences. These are about seeking knowledge just for its own sake. Think first Philosophy, what we now call metaphysics, but also mathematics, and natural philosophy, which included physics, biology,
That's
psychology.
understanding the fundamental nature of things.
Exactly. Second, the practical sciences. These are concerned with conduct, with goodness in action. So primarily ethics and politics. How should we live? How should society be structured?
Very relevant.
And third, the productive sciences. These aimed at creating beautiful or useful objects. Things like shipbuilding, medicine, music, theater, and crucially, also rhetoric and poetics.
Making things tangible or intangible.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean for how he actually did philosophy? He didn't just sit and think in isolation. He had a distinct method, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
His method is key. Unlike some philosophers who might start with, say, radical doubt, Aristotle began with the conviction that our senses and our minds are, for the most part, dependable guides to reality. He usually start by considering phenomena,
Mm-hmm.
the appearances, or maybe things appearing to be the case, just how things seem to us, basically. Then, when these appearances threw up puzzles, he called them aporia difficulties or contradictions.
Okay.
He would then collect and doxa. These are the credible opinions on the matter. What do respected thinkers say? What do most people believe?
Ah, so like a detective gathering clues and witness testimonies, checking what everyone else thinks.
That's an excellent analogy. Yes. He aimed to reconcile as many of these appearances and credible opinions as possible. He'd refine them, clarify them, sometimes reject a few if they really didn't fit, but always trying to preserve the bulk of common sense and expert opinion.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think about his approach to time and the physics.
Yeah.
We all experience time passing, right? It seems obvious.
Yeah.
But when you try to define it, you get stuck. He lays out the aporiae, the puzzles. If time is made of past, present, and future, but the past is gone and the future isn't here yet, and the present is just an instant, how does time even exist?
Good point.
And if the present, the now, is always changing, when does it change? Is the now always the same or always different? These puzzles force you into a deeper analysis about duration, continuity, divisibility. It's this method of starting with appearances and puzzles that let him systematically investigate really complex concepts.
So his method helps him get started, laying out the problems, but how does he build a rigorous understanding from there? He's often called the father of logic.
He is indeed. And it's arguably one of his greatest achievements. He provided the first truly systematic treatment of correct reasoning. He called it analytics, what we now just call logic. His work on this, collected later in the Organon, literally laid the groundwork for logical thought for over 2,000 years.
That's incredible. Kant saying logic hadn't taken a single step backward since Aristotle.
It's an astonishing statement, isn't it? And really speaks to the power and completeness of what Aristotle achieved there.
So what was so revolutionary about his logic? What did he figure out?
He developed syllogistic logic. That's a theory of deduction, where a conclusion follows necessarily just from the structure of the premises. The classic example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. The structure itself guarantees the conclusion if the premises are true.
Right. A leads to B, B leads to C, so A leads to C.
Pretty much, yeah, that's a perfect deduction. He analyzed all sorts of valid argument forms. He even developed meta-theorems about logic itself, like proving rules such as no deduction contains two negative premises. He built a whole system.
Okay, so logic is the essential tool. But what about actual scientific knowledge? Was it just about valid arguments for him?
No, and that's a fascinating distinction he made. There's mere deduction, and then there's science or episteme. Science, for Aristotle, required more. The premises of a scientific demonstration couldn't just be true. They had to be necessary truths and also better known by nature.
Better known by nature, what does that mean?
It means they reveal the genuine, objective, mind-independent natures or causes of things. Science doesn't just report facts. It explains them by showing their causal priorities, why things must be the way they are.
Okay, so it's about the why.
Exactly. The explanation is asymmetrical. For example, a tree sheds its leaves because the diminished sunlight inhibits chlorophyll production, which is needed for photosynthesis. It's not just that leaf shedding and less sun happen together. The cause explains the effect.
That makes sense. But this raises a question. If science starts with these better-known, necessary premises, how do we ever get to those fundamental truths? Does it just go on forever explaining explanations?
The infinite regress problem. He tackles this head on. He argues against both infinite regress and circularity in explanation. You can't just keep asking why forever, and you can't explain A by B and B by A. His solution is that we ultimately grasp the immediate premises, the first principles, through a kind of unmediated intellectual apprehension. He called it nous.
Nous, like intuition.
Sort of, but it's not just a guess. It's a kind of higher level understanding that's built up from perception, memory, and experience, lots of experience. It's a journey from observing many particulars to grasping the universal, necessary features of reality.
Okay, so we've got his method, logic, science. Let's pivot to the very nature of reality itself. What did Aristotle think things truly are? What's the world made of, fundamentally?
Well, he was deeply committed to essentialism. That's the idea that things have necessary features, an essence, that makes them what they are. His favorite technical term for essence is a bit of a mouthful. To chien einai. It basically means the what it was to be for that thing.
The what it was to be.
Yeah, for a human, the essence might be being rational. And crucially, this essence isn't just a feature, it's the feature that explains other necessary features, like why humans are capable of learning grammar, for instance.
Okay, so an essence is what makes the thing fundamentally that thing and explains its capabilities. But what about language? Sometimes one word seems to mean different things, right?
Absolutely. And this brings us to another key concept, homonymy, or as he put it, being spoken of in many ways. This contrasts with univocity, where a word has just one single meaning everywhere it's used.
Like your example earlier, the bank of a river versus a financial bank.
Yeah.
Those are homonyms.
Exactly. They just share a name by chance. Aristotle used this idea to critique Plato sometimes, arguing Plato wrongly assumed univocity for tricky concepts like goodness.
Right, like saying Socrates is good versus this piece of cake is good. Those aren't really the same kind of good.
Precisely. Aristotle would use a paraphrase test. Can you substitute the definition, Socrates is a virtuous person versus this cake is tasty? Clearly not interchangeable. So good is multivocal. But he also identified something really interesting. Core-dependent homonymy. Here, the meanings are different, but they're related, and they all depend on one core meaning.
How does that work?
His classic example is the word healthy. Socrates himself is healthy. He possesses health. That's the core meaning. But then his exercise regime can be called healthy because it promotes health. And his complexion can be called healthy because it indicates health.
Ah, I see. Different senses, but all related back to the primary state of being healthy.
Exactly. And this is hugely significant because he applied this very idea to the concept of being itself. He argued that being is spoken of in many ways, but all these ways are related back to and depend upon the core concept of substance.
Okay, so that leads us straight to what exactly is a substance for Aristotle? How does he categorize all these different beings in the world?
His theory of categories is absolutely foundational here. He proposed there are 10 basic categories of being, things said without combination, as he put it. The main one is substance, like a particular man or a horse. Then there's quantity, how much, quality, what kind, relative, how it relates to others, where, when, position, having, like, being armed, acting upon, and being effective.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is, but think of them as categorizing the basic building blocks of facts about the world. If you state a fact like Socrates is pale sitting down in the Lyceum yesterday, you're involving multiple categories. Socrates is the substance. Pale is a quality. Sitting down is a position. In the Lyceum is where. Yesterday is when. But the substance Socrates himself is primary. All the others depend on him or some substance. Time, for instance, he saw as a kind of quantity, dependent on processes involving substances.
Got it. Substances are the fundamental things, and the other categories describe them. And how does this connect to his famous four causes?
Ah, yes, the four-causal explanatory scheme. It's absolutely central to his whole approach to understanding anything. He believed that to really fully grasp something, you need to identify four aetia.
Aetia.
Yeah, often translated as causes, but maybe better thought of as becauses or explanatory factors. Four kinds of answers to the question, why? First, the material cause. What's it made of? The bronze of a statue, the wood of a table.
Okay, the stuff.
Second, the formal cause. What is its structure or form? The shape the sculptor imposes on the bronze, the blueprint of the house. The essence, really.
The pattern or definition.
Third, the efficient cause. What brought it about? The sculptor who made the statue. The parents of a child, the builder of the house. The agent.
The trigger or maker.
And fourth, the final cause or telos. What is it for? Its purpose or end or goal. The statue exists to honor the president. The acorn's purpose is to become an oak tree.
Right. Material, form, agent purpose.
Hmm.
The final cause, the telos, seems like the most controversial one today, especially when applied to nature. We get a sculptor having a purpose, but did Aristotle really think nature itself had purposes without a conscious designer?
He absolutely did. That's his idea of teleology without design. He looked at the natural world and saw a purpose everywhere in living things. Kidneys aren't just there, they are for purifying blood. Teeth aren't random, they are for chewing food. Spiders spin webs for catching prey. Plants grow leaves for the sake of the fruit.
So he saw function as inherent purpose.
Yes. He observed that things in nature happen always, or for the most part, in predictable ways that lead to certain ends, and this couldn't be due to mere chance. Therefore, he concluded, they must be for the sake of something, some end. He explicitly rejected silly caricatures like saying rocks fall because they're jubilant to get home. No, he thought this natural teleology, this goal-directedness, was immanent in nature itself, built into the very forms of things, not imposed by some external mind.
Interesting. So what does this mean for the basic makeup of everyday things, like you or me or this table?
This brings us neatly to hylomorphism. That's his view that ordinary objects are composites, combinations of hyl, matter, and morphiform.
Matter and form again.
Yes, it was his way of solving puzzles about change that had bothered philosophers for ages. Think about Socrates getting a tan. What happens?
He changes color.
Right. Socrates himself, the underlying matter or substance persists through the change, but he gains a new quality, a tan that's a change in form, in the broad sense of characteristics. Matter is what underlies change. It's the potentiality. Form is what makes the thing actually what it is at any given moment.
So matter is the potential, form is the actuality.
You got it. And for Aristotle, these weren't just useful concepts. They were real, mind-independent features of the world, explaining how things exist and endure through change.
Okay, so we've gone from logic and science to the structure of reality, essences, causes, matter, and form. Deep stuff. Now let's bring it back to human experience. How did all these ideas translate into his views on living a good life and organizing society?
Well, he saw a direct line. He thought his teleological framework, the idea of purpose or telos, extended directly into ethics and politics. He believed there's an objectively best way for humans to live. It's not just a matter of what you happen to prefer. There's a human telos.
A human purpose.
Yes. He argued the final good for humans, the ultimate goal, must be something pursued for its own sake, something complete in itself and something self-sufficient. And he called this eudaimonia.
Often translated as happiness, but it's more like flourishing, right?
Exactly. It's not just feeling good momentarily. It's about living well, thriving, fulfilling your potential as a human being over a complete life. It's the ultimate answer to why do you want that?
Okay, so eudaimonia is the goal. How do we achieve it? What's the recipe for flourishing?
Here he makes a crucial move, appealing to the specific human function, or ergon. Just like a knife's function, ergon is to cut well, and an eye's function is to see well. What's the unique function of human being? What distinguishes us?
Reason.
Bingo. Our capacity for rational thought. Therefore, Aristotle concluded, human happiness, eudaimonia, must be an activity of the rational soul performed excellently in accordance with virtue.
So it's not just having reason, but using reason well, virtuously.
Precisely. This is the heart of his virtue ethics. Living well is about excellent rational activity, cultivating virtues like courage, temperance, justice, wisdom, through habit and practice. It's an active life, not just a state of being.
That makes a lot of sense. So how did this ethical framework, this focus on virtuous activity and flourishing, flow into his political theory?
For Aristotle, it was a totally natural extension. Politics wasn't just about keeping order or preventing crime. It stemmed directly from ethics, because humans are fundamentally social beings. He famously said, man is by nature a political animal. Politikon zoon. We can only truly flourish within a community, a polis.
The city-state.
Right. The polis exists not just for mere survival, but for the sake of living well, for enabling citizens to perform noble actions and achieve eudaimonia together. The state has an ethical purpose.
So given that goal, did he have a preferred type of government, one that best promoted this collective flourishing?
He did analyze different constitutions. He classified them based on two criteria: who rules, one person, a few people, or the many, and crucially, whether they rule for the common good, the correct forms, or just for their own self-interest, the deviant forms.
Okay, what are the categories?
The correct forms are kingship, ruled by one virtuous leader; aristocracy, ruled by the truly best, the Aristoi; and polity, ruled by the many, but in a way that serves the common interest, often a mix of classes.
And the bad versions.
The Gibeon forms are their corrupt counterparts. Tyranny, ruled by one for self-interest. Oligarchy, ruled by the wealthy few for their own benefit. And democracy.
Wait, democracy is deviant for him.
Yes, in his classification, he saw democracy as ruled by the many poor, primarily for their own interest, which could lead to neglecting merit, instability, and essentially mob rule. He was quite critical of pure, direct democracy as practiced in Athens sometimes.
So what did he favor?
He argued for a meritocratic view of justice. Equals should be treated equally, but those with superior virtue or contribution to the common good might deserve more political influence. While he idealized kingship and aristocracy, he recognized they were hard to achieve. Realistically, he often seemed to lean towards polity, a kind of mixed constitution that balanced elements, possibly including some democratic features, as the most stable and practical option for actual human societies.
A pragmatic approach in the end. And finally, where do things like rhetoric and the arts fit into this huge system? You mentioned them under productive sciences.
Exactly. They're about making things, in this case, persuasive arguments or artistic representations. Rhetoric, for him, was the art or faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. He systematically analyzed the techniques. He identified three contexts: deliberative, political speeches about the future; epideiectic, ceremonial praise or blame; and judicial courtroom arguments about the past.
And the famous appeals.
Yes, the three main modes of persuasion: ethos, establishing the speaker's credibility and good character; pathos, stirring the audience's emotions; and logos, using logical arguments and evidence. He saw rhetoric as a counterpart to dialectic, using probable reasoning and common beliefs to sway an audience effectively.
A practical skill. And what about poetics? Particularly his famous analysis of tragedy. What was its purpose?
Well, this is interesting. Many people today jump straight to catharsis, the idea that tragedy purges or purifies our emotions of pity and fear.
Right, that's the common takeaway.
It is, but Aristotle himself is a bit more circumspect. He says tragedy achieves this catharsis through pity and fear, but he doesn't explicitly state that catharsis is its primary function or goal.
Oh. So what did he think the function was?
He actually suggests the function might be related to learning. He says tragedy brings about learning, that is, figuring out what each thing is. Through mimesis, which is more than just imitation, its representation or enactment tragedy shows us universal truths about human character, how people of certain types are likely to act, and how fortune tests them.
So it teaches us about ourselves and the human condition.
Precisely. He argues this makes tragedy more philosophical and more momentous than history, because history deals with particulars, while tragedy deals with universals. He believed this act of imitation, mimesis, is a fundamental human instinct, how we learn and grow from childhood onwards.
It's just incredibly clear that Aristotle's mind touched on, well, almost every aspect of human inquiry. He really was a foundational figure, a giant.
His influence is, frankly, hard to overestimate. It's immense. After his death, his works weren't immediately dominant everywhere, but eventually they became the absolute backbone of philosophy for centuries. They formed the core of the commentary tradition in later Greek, Byzantine, and especially Arabic philosophy, where he was revered simply as the first teacher.
The first teacher.
And then in the Latin West, particularly through thinkers like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, who famously just called him the philosopher, Aristotelian thought was brilliantly synthesized with Christian theology. That synthesis shaped Western intellectual life for hundreds of years.
So he truly shaped Western thought for over a millennium. But is he still relevant today? Or is he more of a historical curiosity we study?
Oh, far from it. I mean, sure, you had critics like Bertrand Russell in the 20th century who famously quipped that almost every serious intellectual advances had to begin with an attack on some Aristotelian doctrine. Yeah, bit harsh, perhaps. But even if some specific scientific views were overturned, his core ideas and methods are remarkably alive and well. Think about it. He's still often called the father of logic, biology, political science, zoology, embryology, natural law, scientific method, rhetoric, virtue ethics. The list goes on.
That's quite a list of paternities.
It is. Even Charles Darwin, who revolutionized biology, deeply respected him, calling earlier naturalists mere schoolboys to old Aristotle when it came to observation. Modern zoologists still acknowledge him as the father of biology. Nico Tinbergen's famous 4 questions for analyzing animal behavior map directly onto Aristotle's 4 causes. His virtue ethics is undergoing a major revival. His political thought continues to inform debates. His work is still studied intensely, and I really don't see his stature diminishing.
Thank you for your attention. You can subscribe to our podcast if you like it.
Absolutely. And perhaps his enduring relevance lies in that fundamental approach. His emphasis on careful observation, on rigorous logical reasoning, and especially on understanding the purpose, the telos, of things. It remains just a powerful framework for thinking about the world and our place in it. Maybe the most provocative thought to leave you with is one he might pose. What is the telos, the ultimate purpose or flourishing of your own life, and are you living in accordance with it?
See you next time.